So there's a couple of things that I'd want to cover, including some of the things that you've mentioned. I think the one issue that has drawn a lot of attention is the reaction of many countries to the national security law as a kind of countermeasure whereby they have reacted quite strongly. Particularly, I think it's to Article 55 of the national security law, which, of course, quite extraordinarily confers law enforcement power on the mainland office in order to take over a case. But one has to look carefully at the criteria in Article 55 because it does really contemplate a rather exceptional situation, a situation where the Hong Kong authorities are unable to act, the case is too difficult, too complex, or the threat is just overwhelming. It's a very serious threat to national security. So it really is contemplating a very unusual situation. But nonetheless, it does mean that the mainland authorities can exercise jurisdiction.
But they haven't done so.
They haven't done so, but it is the possibility. And it's because of that that they've reacted with countermeasures which they have applied already in suspending extradition treaties. Not only extradition treaties, but suspending also the mutual legal assistance treaties as well. And my count recently is about 10 different jurisdictions, 9 or 10 have already done this. And these are the main common law jurisdictions and partners where we have a lot of human traffic, people coming back and forth. Lots of citizens of those jurisdictions come and visit us, they have family here, etc. But also people who will come here and maybe seek a hiding place if they've committed crimes as well. So I think it's quite regrettable that they reacted so rashly and quickly. And in fact, if you look at the terms of these extradition treaties, it seems to me that there are provisions in them already that could have been sufficient to address their concerns. Because there are rights or authorities, power under these treaties in order to actually refuse a request on humanitarian grounds. There is actually a very specific provision in every one of these treaties that deals with the issue of resurrender. Right? It's the idea that if, let's say, for example, the United Kingdom was to surrender someone to Hong Kong, these treaties say very carefully, very specifically, that you can't surrender that person to another jurisdiction unless you've given that person a chance to leave, right? Or the overseas jurisdiction consents, right? And of course, if that jurisdiction has concerns that the person might be sent to the mainland, which must be another jurisdiction. It doesn't say another country, it says another jurisdiction. Then that person would be protected. And so it seemed to me that most of these agreements already had enough protection in order to address their particular concern.
Like the doctrine of reciprocity as well.
That's right.
I mean, if you say that your national security legislation is so draconian that it is beyond international norms, then that's ground enough on its own. Because it has to be reciprocated that your behavior amounts to the same sort of offense in my jurisdiction and with the same range of punishment. For example, no capital punishment and so on.
And particularly, there's almost in all these agreements, there is the ground of refusal based on nationality. So if there was, for example, concern about a UK national who was their extradition is sought in Hong Kong, then that reason alone would be enough to refuse to send that person. So it seemed to me that there was enough, and it also I wasn't entirely sure why they also had to suspend the mutual legal assistance treaties as well, because that really puts them in a difficult place. Because if you really if, for example, you have a multinational crime, whether it's drug trafficking, human trafficking, and you wanted to get evidence that's in one of these 10 jurisdictions, and this is mutual. You wanted to get evidence in Hong Kong. Of course, there's a lot of banking transactions through our financial system, whether it's money laundering or other things. path of getting that evidence now is now suspended,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and it's as you know, with the American system, which is a bit more sort of intensive compared to our system, they have, before all trial, deposition taking in another jurisdiction where you come from. Right? Then you depose the person, and then you use it in court. Now, how's that going to happen?
That's right.
With all this being withdrawn?
It's not possible.
And it's not related to national security.
And of course, if you get evidence through other means, that evidence might not be admissible in the other jurisdiction. So it seems
so it's a complete lockdown.
It's a really sort of extreme measure that's taken, which without looking at all the implications for
effects and consequences
for justice in general. So that's something I hope that maybe the countries would review again. I mean, it's possible that they could go back to Hong Kong and the Department of Justice and to renegotiate these agreements, to put in a clause to make it very clear that Article 55 would not apply to someone who is surrendered. I think it's clear enough in these agreements, but it could be made clearer. So I hope maybe they might take that step to renegotiate.
I think that's wishful thinking because it's political. It's a political gesturing, and they're sanctioning chief executives. If you sanction someone like the Secretary of Justice, who's in charge of the legislation, then how can you, on the other hand, start negotiating with her to say, So you've basically like preempted the situation, and as I've said, I mean, it just, tearing the edifice down. And I think the main thing is like what you've done with. I think, is it NY University, New York University, that perhaps we can start a dialogue with the right professional people, the lawyers, the judges, right? People who have offices in Hong Kong, American law firms, all right? I mean, we should have a dialogue going. And as I say, let's confront the issue. Let's not just just go with wanton action, which really hurts Hong Kong, and actually, in that respect, hurts the whole international system.
But that was the point I was going to make on sanctions. I also wanted to address that. These sanctions have been in place now. I think these countries need to ask themselves, is it really effective? Is it really achieving their purpose? If you look at the Hong Kong officials who've been sanctioned, their response, it seems to be an inconvenience for them, but it has not at all affected their decisions. In fact, it's validated their decisions in many respects, really. With the sanctions in place, of course, it makes it very difficult to have that dialogue that you mentioned, Alan.
Exactly.
And one has to think, shouldn't if you really want to have constructive dialogue, to sit down to really address their concerns, it seems like sanctions is not the right way of approaching the matter.
And also, might I add that all the actions, precipitative actions that all these Five Eyes countries have taken. Sanctioning, taking away Hong Kong's special trading status with the U.S., extradition treaties withdrawn, mutual assistance schemes withdrawn. There'll be more coming, and granting asylum to people who commit crimes in Hong Kong, not national security crimes, but as Margaret Thatcher says, murder is murder. There's no political murder. Bombing is bombing. There's no political bombing. There's no political violence, and that ought to be. But what message does that give to the people of Hong Kong and to the rest of the world? So I think that there are more action coming. But I think that the whole point is that what disturbs me is when you have the national parliaments of these countries, the British Parliament, the U.S. House of Representatives and Congress and Senate, that these are places for discussion, not just action. And even in these places, there's been, no discussion in the sense, why don't they invite people like me or Professor Simon Young to go and speak before you suspend the U.S. Hong Kong Policy Act or impose sanctions on Hong Kong officials? What's there to be lost to hear the other side of the coin, right?
So, Alan, the last point I want to just talk about is something that you raised, which is the foreign judges, because we see now not just governments but also the citizens of these respective countries calling for the foreign judges to stop coming to Hong Kong. And I think that would be most regrettable. I think foreign judges since 1997 have made an enormous impact in a positive way to both.
I think that's the best feature of one country system
to the development of the law,
years.
And also in terms of signaling to businesses and investors and giving them reassurance that the rule of law is intact. And in fact, something you mentioned earlier about the human rights clauses in the national security law. In fact, when you go through the national security law, it's not just one clause. There are actually 9 provisions that refer to respect for individual rights, fair trial, the interests of the individual. Those clauses are quite important for the interpretation of that law. And judges from overseas, or Hong Kong judges, it's actually a very well accepted principle of interpretation that you refer to these human rights clauses in interpreting the national security law, the offenses, the police powers. And we can rely upon the foreign judges to give effect to these principles. And in fact, that would be a very effective way of ensuring that the individual rights of Hong Kong people are protected. So far from removing them from the final court, if they're truly, these countries are truly interested in the well-being of Hong Kong people, you want them to be there in order to help develop the law in a humane way.
Get your judges to look at what is actually a very rich piece of legislation in terms of content. And there's a lot of room for proper judicial interpretation according to common law principles and international norms. That should be encouraged.
So those are the main 3 points that I wanted to talk about. So,
well, Simon,
I'm happy to talk about other things as well.
I think that we will, on the next time, we'll talk on another aspect, which I'm keen to get you to speak on. But the main thing is that I hope that you will also bring the message back to the university and also lawyers and other universities in Hong Kong, that maybe we can all start what I call basic law dialogue going. Keep the platform there. There is certainly an international interest with all this drastic action, right? It's getting on to such a state that there are people, American businesses coming to me for advice to say, I don't even know how to affect my trading on the stock exchange with these sanctions, you know? I mean, the whole thing has gone on with such speed that nobody is plugged in. There's been no engagement with the vested interests, with the affected parties, and it's pure political posturing. And I hope that maybe it's a time for that to be given a rest. Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan.
Take care.
Thank you.